Well, hello and welcome to this week's A Photographic Life. I'd like to start off this week with a thank you to all of you who got in contact with me to say that you really enjoyed the William Klein story I told a few weeks ago about how I commissioned him to create some work for a magazine and how that work then went on to have its own life in books and in art galleries. The way in which that work was made was very simple, and I think it's informative to people who get overexcited about buying kit and the need for kit. It was just a straightforward Nikon 35mm camera that Klein used and some black and white analog film. This was in pre-digital days. Also reminded me of a couple of other photographers who I had the honour, the pleasure, the joy of working with. Two photographers whose work could not be more different from each other, but who worked in exactly the same way. Those photographers are Jeanloup Sieff and Corinne. Yeah, the kind of old establishment of photography, and in the 1990s and late 1980s, the upcoming, I suppose, I hate the phrase, but enfant terrible. I think Corinne was a much better photographer than perhaps she was given credit for in her time. And her very sad and young demise, I think to a certain extent, could lead to her work being forgotten, but then hopefully rediscovered. Maybe a rediscovery is around the corner. Anyway, Jeanloup Sieff I commissioned to photograph the model Elle Macpherson. If you know Sieff's work, you'll know that he's very well known for his nudes. Female nudes, which in a lot of ways have gone out of fashion and I suppose can be perceived as being politically incorrect. I'm not sure. Anyway, when I worked with Jeanloup in the 1990s, he wasn't working for anybody. The work had definitely been put to one side and sort of relegated to a 1970s kind of perhaps soft erotica kind of photography. I don't know, it's such a difficult area to discuss. But anyway, I really love Jeanloup's portraits and therefore I wanted him to photograph the model Elle Macpherson, but he wanted to do her completely naked and it was a jewellery shoot, so we did her naked with incredibly expensive jewellery. Now, I've written about that shoot and it's available on the UnitedNationsOfPhotography.com website. Just put in the name Jeanloup Sieff and you will get all the details. What I really wanted to focus on here was that Sieff arrived from Paris. I picked him up at the airport. We worked together on the day with Elle. It was just the three of us. And he worked with the Nikon that was around his neck, a trolley on which he lined up his rolls of film, a grey background and one light. And that was it. He didn't even have a backup camera with him. Working with Corinne was quite similar. I started with her working in a studio, and again, this shoot is recalled in detail on the UnitedNationsOfPhotography.com website. But we started in a photographic studio with all of the ephemera around us that I suppose she thought was required to photograph the actress Patsy Kensit, who was quite a big deal at the time. It was just pre her relationship with Liam Gallagher. And I think at the time she was still with Jim Kerr, the singer of Simple Minds. In fact, she was, because he picked her up at the end of the day. Anyway, that was the beginning. It didn't really work. We ended up very late at night in a grungy hotel above Paddington Station with Corinne running up and down the corridors, just once again with a 35mm Nikon camera, shooting colour film at that time. Colour neg, in fact. Two photographers working at the height of their profession, creating iconic images with just the camera they had around their neck. For me, there's more to learn in that than a million YouTube videos about how you can manipulate, buy a new lens, why you need the new camera, what's the problem with mirrorless, and all the rest of that noise. There is no doubt that the 1990s were a very exciting time to be working as a commissioned photographer for all sorts of different reasons, actually. There are a lot of outlets through magazines. Celebrities gave you a lot of access, and the people who were commissioning the photography, such as myself, were actually all relatively young and therefore really keen to try out new things, work with new photographers, old photographers, just kind of ruffle things up a little bit. Well, one of the photographers, I suppose, who's quite closely identified with that world from the 1990s, certainly within the UK, is Rankin. Now, I first commissioned Rankin to photograph some children's portraits for me at Tatler magazine in the early 90s. I remember him coming to see me with a portfolio in which there were primarily just photographs of models wearing socks, very much done in a Sam Haskins way, if you know his work with Cowboy Kate. And I really liked that work. It's very much of the time. Again, I suppose a bit like Jeanloup Sieff's, it hasn't fared well with time. But anyway, Rankin then, of course, went on with Jefferson Hack to found Dazed and Confused magazine, and therefore Rankin suddenly had a whole load of commissions available to him through his own magazine, so he could commission himself. On the back of that, he then went on to make a lot of relationships with record companies in the days when record companies wanted their celebrities on the cover of magazines. He could obviously offer the front cover of Dazed and Confused, and therefore he then started to photograph some really big names in the music industry, in fashion and so forth. I'm not going to get into the situation around Rankin's work and how Rankin acts and has behaved within the industry. That's for you to find out and for everybody to have their own opinions. One of the things I never do on this podcast is criticize people for the sake of criticizing them. There's no reason to do that. But Rankin made a lot of money. He appeared on the television. He had his studios, his assistants, and so forth. And if you want to read about what it was like to be photographed by Rankin, great writer for United Nations photographer who has also sadly left us in the last year or so, Pete Silverton, went along and was photographed by Rankin. And if you put in Rankin and Peter Silverton, on the UNP website, you'll find that story as well. I'm doing a lot of promotion of the website this week. That's not deliberate, it's just a thing. Anyway, the reason I'm talking about Rankin is because I noticed coming up on my Facebook algorithm feed that he's promoting a Have Your Photo Taken at Rankin Live this December. Slots have been booking up fast, so we've added extra times. He says, getting to my North London studios, super easy. Free weekend parking nearby. And book your one-on-one photo shoot. Enjoy solo as a couple with a friend. Or gift it to a loved one, the kids, or even your dog. But be quick, time slots have been filling up. Book via the link in my bio. And I thought, well, that's rather strange. That's the first time I've seen a photographer such as Rankin working at the level he was working at, doing that kind of a thing. I know Martin Parr has done a kind of come along and be photographed by Martin for a relatively small fee at his studio down at the Martin Parr Foundation in Bristol. And I know he's been doing that also. But it seemed slightly different between Martin's kind of interest in people and Rankin's interest in celebrity. For me, it seemed a strange decision. I don't know why he's done it. Maybe he'd like to get in touch and tell us. But I also noticed that he's promoting that his books are now 50% off on his online store, rather humorously, I suppose, titled rankinswag.com. Anyway, they're at 50% off for the rest of the year. Now, whatever we want to say about how the world of professional photography is going, the reality of those two decisions, to me, and I may be wrong, of course, point to a need to get some revenue in. Nobody wants to get stuck with boxes and boxes of books, whether you're Rankin or just somebody who just wants to put a body of work together. We want to sell them, of course we do. But a 50% discount is quite a big discount, and he's paying for Facebook sponsored ads to promote that. The Rankin Live event is also a paid for Facebook ad. So there's an amount of investment going into those financial decisions, I suppose, creative decisions perhaps. I don't know. I can only report on what I see. And what I see points to the fact that however big a name you are, times are tough. I know you enjoyed listening to the listeners' letters element of the podcast that's been slowly evolving actually over the past year. I know you enjoy it because you tell me you do, and you keep getting in touch with me, which is great. So I've got a few more to share with you this week. This one comes in from Australia. G'day, Scott. Now, that's how it was written. That's not me trying to be funny. Anyway, g'day, Scott and Bill. I'm a late comer to the podcast, but have been enjoying the back catalogue during work trips up and down the East Coast over the past year. Your last episode of Photo Quote Table Tennis was fantastic, but it was the preamble about photographers looming for help in their pursuits that struck a chord. I've spent 20 plus years living and working in the Northern Territory and was constantly being hit up by photographers to be a fixer, paid and unpaid, for contacts, background and insights into communities where I had built up strong relationships of trust. The few times that I've helped out photographers and crews, it has always ended in either a disappointing result with classless, boorish, rude behaviour or an outright misrepresentation, all of which reflected badly on me and put stress on my reputation and relationships. So as a result, my reply always is, I don't fix, mate. I love the last two quotes, by the way, but as I get older, I'm identifying more with Alfred Steichen than Eugene Smith. I'll leave you with a quote that was passed on to me by one of my first editors. Turn up early and don't be a D-head. All the best, Glenn. Another letter here came in. Hi, Grant. What a great chat about quotes today and how wise they were. So much interesting stuff. I'm struggling to keep up, but I get all of it. I had a scan of my headaches the other day, and I'm happy to cast off the default diagnosis of migraine and all its associated treatments in favour of a cranial spinal fluid leak. Anyway, after 30 months of all this, it seems a cure is at hand. I need time to reread and re-listen to the last few of your posts and podcasts before I chuck in my free pennyworth. But your latest on portraiture has provoked many memories, and the realisation that I've had such a journey learning shoot by shoot how to cope. I would suggest the work of Walker Evans is a great example of conquering not only our own fears, but avoiding the risk to the dignity and sensitivity of others in situations we can never fully empathise with. I have one theory amongst several that portrait subjects fall into broadly three categories. Those who have had bad experiences or just hate being subjected to the process, those who have survived enough sessions to be comfortable and forgiving, those who damn well love it, the celebs and frequently photographed, who have developed their photo persona and slip easily into their favourite pose. I guess I have photographed well over 500 bosses and workers in a number of countries, in many cases without speaking their language quite well enough. I can recommend asking about their occupation, life, sympathetically and with gentle interest, the use of respect for both subject and their work. A little understanding and appreciation of that helps. Starting simply without drama and giving the impression the subject is a gift to the camera. Learn how and when control would help. Don't tell them to be natural. Who have encouraged them to relax by easing the pressure? Who has, I should say. Trying to explain it's a joint enterprise, teamwork and making sure the subject does not feel used. Sharing digital images occasionally. Above all, to appreciate their vulnerability and sharing it without empathy and humility, you will fail. Photography has taught me so much about life, and the learning never stops, even after 50 years. Best John. I think that John is one of the 3 Johns who we featured a few episodes ago. John does seem to hit the nail right on top of the head, and I hope he feels well soon. Another one's come in here. Hi, Grant. Love the podcasts, and thank you for taking the time to create and share them with us. Well, that's a pleasure. I'm writing regarding analogue or film photography and wanted to share with you a point of view given to me by a young barista who recently gained his degree in photography. For the record, I'm with you on all things film. Yes, it is what we used back in the day, but you, me, we can make any raw file look like almost any film style, so why bother with the faff of film? Back to the barista. As we chatted, he said when he takes his RZ out, he takes his RZ out often. He isn't that bothered about getting a great photo. It's interesting. Like you mentioned, he loves the process, the gadgetry, the clicks, the focusing, and of course the surprises when he gets the film back. I relate this in part to those who love playing an LP on a record player or putting a cassette tape in and pressing big chunky buttons. Old school is very tactile. Digital is all haptics and instant info. My 18-year-old daughter's boyfriend loves photography, mainly wildlife on a budget, so think DSLR and long lens, but he loves the OM2 I gave him and uses it for the everyday when he can afford film. My 15-year-old son likes using an FM2, likes twisting the lens to focus and winding on film. With their world mostly online, maybe they appreciate these things a little more. Similarly, we love the convenience of all things digital. Remember being able to burn your own CDs? Well, I do, and making mixtapes also. Anyway, just thought I'd share my experiences with analog and the younger set. Best wishes, Steve. Well, there's lots I could pick apart there, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let you mull over those points raised. And of course, get in touch with me if you'd like to respond to some of the things that I say on the podcast or I say in the articles. I'm writing quite a lot of articles at the moment. I seem to be enjoying that after a period, I think probably having written a few books. I needed a bit of time off of the writing, but I'm back on it now. So quite regularly, I say maybe 1 or 2 a week, articles are going up on UN Photo. And of course, there is a huge archive there of material for you to catch up on. Podcast episodes as well as articles about everything to do with photography, actually. It really is quite a rich archive for you to explore, to agree with and disagree with, perhaps learn from, perhaps be entertained by. I don't know. I put that over to you. I'm not here to try and control you. I'm just here to put some things out there for you to respond to. Anyway, as we're coming to the end of the year, some really exciting interview conversations coming up on the podcast throughout December, which were all recorded at our podcast live event. That's a discussion with photographer, filmmaker Alice Tomlinson, which is absolutely not to be missed, with photographer and filmmaker Chris Floyd, and also with curator and historian Michael Pritchard from the Royal Photographic Society. And that's going to be taking us up to Christmas, as well as an episode in which Bill Shapiro and I are in conversation after he returns from Paris Photo. So, lots more to come before we get to Christmas. I think what we've got to do, though, is to take care.